Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Tom and John Show. I'm Tom Watchkey, retired from Penn State University for a while now, but enjoy still interacting with folks in the field, and that's what this show is all about. And our guest today is Adam Moeller from the USGA. He likes to hang out in the upper Midwest, the Northeast, and all those places have great golf and a variety of activities from snowboarding to golf. And we're going to be talking about a number of issues and getting to know Adam better. And I have a cohort in John Kaminsky, and he's our biographical specialist, and he does the intro from here forward.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tom, and welcome, Adam, to episode, who knows, we have it listed as 17, but I'm not sure at this point, of the Tom and John Show. And Adam, before we get started, I thought I'd give you kind of a little bit of a rundown in bio, or give your rundown in bio so everybody knows who you are across the country. I know you're pretty well known in the Midwest and Northeast where you're located, but we'll try and get some of the people in other areas to know who you are.
Great.
Before I start that too, Tom, I'm broadcasting from my home office because I'm catching up on email after my trip to South Africa, and I notice all your awesome pictures and stuff behind you, and I'm looking at mine, and I've got nothing, I've got a bright window, and so I'm gonna have to get some kind of wall behind me that has good pictures of I don't know, something, golf course pictures maybe that I took. So, Adam, just to give a brief bio, and then I'll turn it over to you. You are from Wisconsin, and you went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison to get a turf degree. I don't know what the date was. What date was that? When did you finish?
Let's see, I graduated in 2005, December 2005.
Yeah, so that makes me feel very old, even though I feel like we're close. I'm not. We're not. I'm old. And then I know that you went to, well, you did some internships at Black Wolf Run in Wisconsin, and also worked in Madison at Black Hawk Country Club or golf course. But then you went to work with Dr. Bigelow, who's been on the program. So you went to work with Kale. And I thought about it. Actually, I'd like you to kind of tell us, after I finish your bio, tell us what you did, what your project was with Kale.
Sure.
Anyway, when you left Kale, that was probably I was hoping to steal you away and bring you to do a PhD with me. I distinctly remember that. But at that same time, you interviewed for the job as the regional agronomist with the USGA, and that was a little over 7 years ago. So you've been with the USGA for 7 years now. In what was the Northeast, and now is a larger Northeast. So why don't you maybe expand a little bit on your bio, and then we'll kind of see what things you've been seeing this year around the country.
Okay, sure. So thanks for having me, number one. And as you talked about your office, I'm in my office too. I'm actually at a rest stop in Pennsylvania, parked in my car. I'm in the driver's seat, or in the passenger seat, so I'm not, I'm not driving. But yeah, a little bit more about my bio, my time in undergrad at Wisconsin, working on golf courses. I really enjoyed that, and when I made the decision to go to grad school, it was really to kind of try to connect all the pieces and learn just that much more. And working with Kale, he was a golf course superintendent at one time, so a lot of his projects were applied research focused on helping superintendents kind of right away with some of their problems. And so I had an opportunity to really look at a number of different aspects of golf course management, specifically putting green management. My research was focused on evaluating sort of root zone management programs for newer bentgrasses, looking at fertility. We did a lot of PGR work and wetting agent work, so and then a bunker sand evaluation. So we got a lot of really good applied science that was geared towards, like I said, focusing superintendents early on. And then from there, kind of like you said, I was coming to the Northeast to do a PhD under you, and then I got a different opportunity, which is what my entire goal was to always become an agronomist with the USGA. So I politely declined, and I've been thankful you've not held it against me too much for letting me skip out on the PhD with you.
No, there's one thing that you kind of learn in this industry is you never try and hold somebody back, and so it's exciting for you as young as you were at the time to get the nod from the USGA to come and take over that. We were discussing before we went live on air that you're not so young anymore in terms of the USGA. Maybe in terms of age, you're still pretty young, but in terms of seniority, there's been a few new hires that have come on since after the passing of Stan and then the hiring of Elliot and what's the new guy's name? I can't even remember.
Addison Barton.
Yeah, Addison.
Yep.
So anyway, you're kind of you're an older guy now. You're a more senior agronomist. So
yeah,
I thought where we would start because you visit. First of all, how many golf courses do you visit in a year?
Oh man, it averages between probably 70 and 80 or so. The tougher weather years we see a little bit more. So those are not always a fun extra visits when it's because there's problems. But yeah, 70 or 80 is a good number. Right,
and those 70 or 80 aren't just, I mean, sometimes they might be popping in, but they're actually visits. I mean, they're actually visits where you go around with the superintendent or the Greens chairman and everybody involved. And so 70 or 80 to me, it's a lot, but it's when you put in the amount of time that you're on the actual golf course, it's a heck of a lot. So you've been doing your visits all year, and you said earlier things are kind of winding down to some degree. What have you seen? Tell us what you've seen around the area this summer.
Sure. Well, it wasn't a fun start for a lot of folks, especially where people had winter injury in 2014. There was a lot of winter injury again in 2015. So winter injury is a tough one to explain to a club official, owner, president. Superintendents understand that there's some variables you can control and a lot of variables you can't, but when you start off the season kind of looking at some dead grass and knowing there's going to be revenue challenges and pace, playability challenges long term throughout the summer, definitely not a fun start to the season. So that was probably the number one topic all through late March through May. Into May, it seemed like the dominant topic after that was just dry conditions. There was some courses that were basically going through water as if it was peak season in July. So there was not a lot of courses that got a ton of rain in May. So that made for some good conditions, but at the same time, there's a lot of folks that were doing aggressive aeration or verticutting on like fairways, and try to keep the place firm and fast. And you need recovery from verticutting and aeration. That means some water. So it was kind of a tough balance for a lot of superintendents to maximize playability yet try to get recovery for some of those. So there's a couple of different superintendents that we were trying to work with to, okay, let's educate your golfers here. You like the firm conditions, you see a little verticut lines or aeration holes for a couple extra weeks. You can't sort of have your cake and eat it too. So that was kind of a challenge in May, I think, for a lot of folks there.
Hey,
go ahead.
I was just going to ask, the turf losses in 2014, do you think most of that was POA?
Yeah. Overwhelmingly, it was POA, both in 14 and in 15. We've seen that some bentgrass was killed, especially I know actually in the research plots at UMass there was some bentgrass killed, and there's always potential for bentgrass to die, especially more northern locations. But everything I saw, it was POA that got wiped out. It was low areas where either water sat or water was trying to flow off the green.
Let me follow that up if you don't mind. In 2014, I'm assuming that part of the renovation process was to try to get bent established into those areas where POA was killed. And I don't know whether in 2015 you had the opportunity to go back to the same course and reevaluate whether the renovation of bent had made a difference in the amount of winter damage, or both of them got clobbered.
Yeah. Well, there's a number of courses that got hit equally hard in 2015 as it did in 2014. I think the challenge with getting winter injury and getting it recovered is at some point you just want turf cover, and you always want bent to get in those spots to set yourself up to have less concern in the future. But we know POA is going to still come in those spots just with the cultivation and overseeding work and trying to baby it back together. a lot of times the pole will still fill in some of those low areas. So a few courses had, I would say, less injury than in 2014, but there's a couple courses that it was worse. So kind of depends on how successful they were in getting bentgrass in those areas. And there was a couple of courses in the Ontario market that either rebuilt or regrassed completely, and obviously they made it out okay, just fine. But it's always a challenge to try to get the bent to get established and then outcompete the POA.
That's absolutely true. And by the same token, it's also young.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it gets established in there, let's say, by late July or August, something like that. But then it's got to endure, as a seedling, some pretty stressful conditions, and really only has the fall to kind of get established and mature. And here comes winter again.
Yeah.
So you do the best you can. If you make some gains, that's great. If you're back to square one, it wasn't because you didn't try.
Yeah, exactly.
Adam,
that's what. Yeah, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, we talked a lot earlier in the year with some of these shows about winter kill and what people should do. Well, they've all done different things, and you've probably seen it all and seen success or failures. What did people do that was successful to get the turf back as quick as possible?
Boy, a lot of combinations that work. The best combo that I saw, and I knew it very early on when I was there, right after they had done the cultivation program, was very aggressive verticutting, to try to get as many seeds into the ground as possible and to get good seed-to-soil contact. So usually aggressive verticutting, slice seeding, combined with some sort of dimple aeration, like with job saver tines or even some smaller cores, those seem to work. The ultimate, I think, is getting some form of covers on top of those seedlings, permeable covers, just to warm the soils, and that will help speed the germination process and hopefully speed the maturation process of it. And then staying off them, keeping the golfers off them, putting temp greens out, never popular, but it makes a big difference. We see pretty much consistently every year courses that there's always a couple that don't use temporary greens and just sort of move the whole location around it, and they're still struggling now with those winter injury spots thinning out, and golfers kind of have a short memory, so they're asking why are there problems when they forgot it was related to winter injury. But yeah, the best results I saw, verticutting in a couple directions. They were really careful. They used backpipe blowers to blow the verticut channels open, seeded, covered, and just sort of babied it back to life. And it still took them until about early to mid-June before all those greens were open. So patience, unfortunately, which it's a tough one to recommend.
Yeah, I know. I visited a lot of golf courses that had problems, and as agronomists, I think we know what the answer is, and as golfers, I think they kind of know what the answer is too. They just don't want to believe it. They want to believe that they can get out there and play, so it is what it is. So take winter kill or winter injury out of it, and let's look at some of the problems that we had. I know this was a bad dollar spot year, but what other main issues did you see out there, whether it was weather related or disease or insect or stupidity? I mean, there's a lot of that goes around. So what happened this summer?
Yeah, disease-wise, I would agree with the dollar spot comment that it was maybe a little bit of a tougher year. Other disease issues, saw a little bit of summer patch, a little bit of anthracnose. Nothing really too unmanageable. The summer patch always is, I think, is a little bit more difficult to manage because people will sort of follow a pretty good program, and you still sometimes see some breakthrough. Most of the stuff that I was dealing with was weather extremes. Whether there was a lot of courses like in the east end of Long Island that didn't get much more than 2 or 3 tenths of rain for a 6-week period, and then there was other courses in Pennsylvania that through June had 10 plus inches of rain. So they're dealing with both those two extremes, and the mechanical components of it with mowing when it's wet or mowing when it's dry, vice versa. Those are probably more the issues than anything. I continue to see when it's a year of extremes with weather, the perimeters of greens and the collars usually take the worst beating, mainly because of the traffic issues that are involved in it, and they're just sort of these in-between areas where folks are they're focused on the greens. They're focused on, you know, kind of the areas outside of the greens, but the collars really need almost their own program, and so sometimes you see some wear and tear just from traffic decline. Trying to think other diseases.
Stick on that for a second, though.
Yep.
Talk about the collar. I obviously I hear it a lot, and in Dernoden's book he talks about managing collars in the Mid-Atlantic and having that you know, that separate management program for that. What are you recommending for people that in terms of, you know, that they need to do something different? What are you recommending?
Sure. You know, a lot of it is a grass issue. If you have pole bent collars, but pole is the predominant species, or even a lot of ryegrass in your collars, there are some playability challenges with them, but bentgrass collars just do not have the same traffic tolerance, and you know, it's often a change if people have collar issues and then they sod out a section of bentgrass. It almost always, you know, fails or thins out, because you really have to dedicate that separate program for the bentgrass. So generally speaking, collars, a lower mowing height typically results in better conditioning because there's more plants per square inch. I think that's especially important for bentgrass. So it's an opposite, you know, sort of normal recommendation. A lower height of cut oftentimes improves plant conditions for collars. You know, if you do that to greens or fairways, it's the opposite. The stuff starts to thin out. So that's one. Definitely trying to get that height of cut anywhere from, I'll probably see an average of 300 to 325 for collars. The lowest I've seen is maybe 250. But again, that's for bentgrass collars, typically a newer bentgrass variety.
Is anybody? I was at a course in Canada, and they had seeded or sodded their collar to something different. They chose a less dense collar cultivar. Do you see that happening a lot? I know in the Mid-Atlantic, a lot of people were going with ryegrass collars, but it seems like if you're seeding to, you know, A1, A4, or any of the newer grasses, and you then raise that collar up after growing, there's tons of problems with it.
Yeah. Well, I've seen a few courses do that. I know that was an old Stan Zontek recommendation to do something new for your greens and then pen cross for the collars. I think the bigger issue is just getting the collar height and keeping it low from the start. So in a renovation, for instance, seeding or sodding, first year I always say don't have a collar. Just there's nothing in the rules of golf that say that you need a collar. It's a common feature, obviously, but let that grass get mature and then after year one, take the collar height up and try to keep it low to keep the plants sort of as upright as possible and mature as possible. So you want me to keep going on the other collar sort of BMPs?
Yeah, definitely.
Sure. So the turning board issue I think is very helpful. There are a small handful of superintendents that I know that, you know, really aggressively maintain their greens with a lot of mowing, a lot of rolling, and they don't use turning boards. I think for the most part that's pretty rare. The more you do to the greens, the more you're going to see wear and tear in the collars. So whether you use turning boards everywhere or just sort of proactively on your key areas of greens where you know you've got, you know, extra wear and tear without enough room for turning, those definitely help. They do add, obviously, time it takes to mow the greens, but pretty valuable there. Other things, I'll see some superintendents will fertilize their collars separately. They'll still, with their normal greens program, spray the collars with a soluble fertilizer, but then sometimes they'll loop the collars with you know, a real slow release material, kind of June, July, and maybe in August, just to give them a little bit more nitrogen so they can outgrow some of that extra traffic they receive. A couple superintendents have tried to do not applying growth regulators on the collars, kind of for that same theory. So that seems easier said than done to me, to spray just the greens and not the collars. But those are pretty common programs.
So you're saying they're backing off on growth regulation on the collars?
Yeah, just a couple of superintendents have tried to minimize any extra overspray from PGRs onto their collars because I think they want them to grow, you know, and try to grow through some of that traffic. I think it's easier to loop the collars with, you know, something that's like a natural organic fertilizer. Seems common when you're trying to loop something, just so you don't have any burn. But just give it a little bit extra nitrogen so it grows a little bit quicker through the summer and outcompetes the traffic.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I think I think a lot of the collar issues too have become less of an issue with the use of moisture meters, because the collars dry out so much faster, especially on sort of sand-based greens where maybe the construction just feathered out the sand cap across the collars. You can prevent some of that wilt stress that much better with the moisture meters. So that's definitely a part of it, though. Those collars seem to dry out that much quicker.
Yeah. How many guys, is everybody using moisture meters now? I was in South Africa.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I was in South Africa, and there was like one guy that had it, maybe two, and they brought it with them to the meeting, and we were, Mike Richardson was with me, and he was talking about it. And, a lot of people looked at those things like, who the hell has time to deal with that, or they're too expensive for them, which makes sense, because I understand that the budgets are a little different over there. But it was like, really try to convince them that it would be very beneficial to start using the moisture meters more, and just try to tell them how common they are here. So it's good to hear that you're seeing most people using them as well.
Yeah, actually, just last week I had a superintendent tell me that was by far and away the best purchase that their course has made over the past 10 years, was to invest in a couple of moisture meters. I look at them like they really can prevent problems before they happen. So the old traditional techniques certainly work, but if your threshold is at 15% and you look at the turf in the morning and you can't really tell, but you put the moisture meter in and it says 16%, you can sort of prevent that wilt ahead of time. So it definitely, I would say probably 90% of the courses that I visit use those.
Yeah, it's also a great educational tool for the superintendent to use with green committee chairs and other members of the green committee as well, that they can, it's not like putting your hands in the soil, but at least it's close to that as you can get, and see the output, which is quantitative. Say, wow, man, glad we got one of those. I've heard that many times.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think the big thing also is that a lot of times we talk about the low end of the moisture, but it goes the exact opposite. If people think that they're going to be dry during the day, but they put that in there and it says it's 20% moisture, they should know that they're going to make it through. And a lot of times people will put water on it. I think overwatering is usually a worse practice than underwatering. But I will say, remember I said we were going to do Periscope? Well, we're Periscoping. So if anybody's out there watching on Periscope, they can ask questions and I can relay that. It's actually not that difficult to do, to have this thing going and then see if anybody has any questions. So better than trying to track Twitter anyway. So collar management's a big deal. Winter injury was obviously a big deal in the spring, and a few diseases. What else is going on out there that's causing concern for people?
Definitely more recently, it's been the lack of rain. I think for a lot of courses, we've seen a number of facilities that their golf course sort of reservoirs are falling short. So we need sort of some couple heavier shots of rain to try to rehydrate the soils and fill things up. I think aside from that, it's been pretty busy with aeration over the past 2 or 3 weeks. A couple courses got the raw end of the weather deal last week, and the week before was cooler, and then last week, Monday, was a pretty popular day for everyone to aerate, and it was sort of probably 95 in different parts of New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Long Island. So that wasn't fun. I'm sure there's probably some turf that's dinged up a little bit just from sand staying on the surface and not being able to brush into the canopy and get the canopies cooled off, but hopefully it's nothing too catastrophic.
Along those lines, though, a few years ago, we saw a bunch of people in the metropolitan New York area aerate. It was like August. It was on the calendar. Season's over, right? And they had the same thing where it was brutally hot, and they crushed their course. I mean, they really did it. So it kind of just goes to, I guess it's important to impress upon them that calendar date aerations aren't necessarily always the best. I know that there's logistics involved, but you get really hot and sticky, and then go out there and start punching holes, and you could pull some roots up pretty easily.
Yeah, and this is one thing that I've learned from, and I've seen it firsthand, but it was before coming out here that I'd never seen it, where late August aeration, weak roots, you can stimulate maybe some summer patch that was in the soil. It seems like it'll flare up. Maybe it's just the extra stress of it, but it seems like that isn't that uncommon when you have some heat too. So I think a lot of people are trying to be covered for it, but at the same time, there's the benefits of aeration, but it's a heck of a stress on the turf. So I agree, the calendar date approach is good. There's a lot of benefits to August aeration, but it's got to be done carefully, and if you don't have the right manpower to get it done as quickly as possible, a lot of times you can find yourself in kind of a tough situation.
Right. So what are you recommending for the rest of the year? What are people doing, or what are you seeing?
It's been interesting. I've seen a lot of courses talk about renovations, especially like practice facility renovations. So people are doing some long-range planning. In terms of course maintenance, I think a lot of folks, once they're healed from aeration, they're going to be set up for a nice fall. I never want to say it's been an easier weather year, but it hasn't been our toughest. So I think a lot of people that made it through are, they're getting ready to put their foot back down on the gas pedal and try to push for conditions and get the course back to, back up to par after aeration. A couple things with disease. It seems like maybe we go a couple years, we forget about certain diseases like gray leaf spot. That was a big problem a couple years ago. A lot of people got sort of hit hard, and not necessarily because they, forgot about it. They just didn't budget for the fungicide applications, which for the most part, it's not the most difficult disease to control. It's just whether or not you've had it, and have you gotten sort of lulled into that factor of, okay, well, we haven't had gray leaf spot, we don't need to worry about it.
Right.
So that's always one to keep an eye on. Dollar spot resurgence, and it always seems like we have a different dollar spot that can hit in the fall versus like a little more aggressive one that can affect the playability a little bit more. So keeping tight on that program, obviously, which I think a lot of people are okay for greens. It's just the fairways get to this time of year and budgets start to get a little bit tight.
What do you see with ABW much?
Yeah, I see a fair amount in the spring and the summer, and in this time of year it seems like it starts to diminish. A couple courses I know last year that said they had some issues in September, but for the most part, I think those are rare. ABW is a frustrating insect because as an agronomist, you want to say, hey, just scout, and you can manage with only a few applications, but you can understand the superintendent's concerns with, okay, if I have turf loss and I'm not positive what life cycle I have out there, I'm going to make another application. But we've seen pretty good results with, I think a lot of people are excited about the newer insecticide that came out this year, Ference. Hopefully there's less reliance on some of the pyrethroids if there's resistance issues, which seems to be pretty severe in a lot of courses that I visit along New Jersey, metropolitan New York, Long Island.
I agree.
But I think one of the challenges is, again, as a superintendent, expanding your tolerance level, knowing that a little bit of damage is okay, and just trying to minimize those applications. It's a lot easier said than done as an agronomist.
Well, it is, and what I've been seeing is that ABW is sneaky enough that it's probably one of the most misunderstood and misdiagnosed issues. Thinning turf and the like is often blamed on things that aren't being causal, and I think ABW, when you get into those predominantly POA areas where there's traffic and egress and ingress in the same place, and the turf's starting to go the wrong direction about this time of the year, and you start tearing around and ripping things apart, and son of a gun, there those buggers are at the middle of August. And the threshold level, if there is such a thing with ABW, is greatly lower because of the environmental stress that's been going on for the the bulk of the summer, and doesn't take many of them. Where in the springtime, you can get away with a lot of ABW and not even know it.
Yeah, and it's going to be easier to grow out of it too. Typically, in that first wave of larvae in June, you can grow out of a lot of that damage.
That's right. So, well, I was just curious what you're seeing.
But I think the scouting techniques are. I hear more and more people. It's not just the soap flushes for the adults. They're doing the sort of the salt drench for the larvae. So that's at least encouraging that they're doing a little bit more of that. I think still the challenge is it's kind of like the more you look, the more you're going to find, and so that might then still kind of make you get a little bit nervous about making more applications. And it's for how devastating they can be, it's hard to fault anybody for pulling the trigger.
Well, the beauty of it is that at least when they initiate themselves on a golf course, they tend to be in the same place all the time, year after year, which helps in the sense of being able to alert, yourself to, hey, I better dig around a little bit more and see what I got going on there. Because I bet there's more ABW that just walked right past than there is found.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Adam, one thing that I also wanted to address and touch on was the reconfiguration of the USGA and the kind of combining of some of the sections. Can you just touch on what the changes probably don't mean anything from a practical standpoint for the golf course superintendent, but can you touch on the reorganization and also the renaming of the TAS visits, Turf Advisory Service, because I know that there's been more than just the agronomic visits now. You're doing specialized visits. Can you touch on that reorganization and some of the added things that you guys have put on the menu, I guess?
Sure. I'll sort of handle the second question first. That's a quicker answer. So we changed the name from the Turf Advisory Service to the Course Consulting Service, and the rationale behind it was we sort of talked to some folks and realized and we knew this all along. We do a lot more than just talk about turf. So that's kind of where that looked like that avenue came in, and ultimately we're there as a consultant when we're invited into a golf course. So we looked at advisory and thought, okay, consultant, that's a little bit more accurate description of what we are. In terms of the different visit types that we offer now, these are also things that we've sort of already done in the past, some regions more than others. The Northeast, for instance, has been offering a site-specific tree visit where all we do is look at the trees for probably as long as Dave Otis has been in the region. We just are now sort of getting that information out there so course officials understand that is an option. The same thing with a putting green evaluation. We've got a bunker evaluation. In the West, it's maybe a little bit more popular, but to do a full irrigation evaluation, and that's not an irrigation audit. Instead, it's just let's talk about your irrigation system and look at some of the challenges or deficiencies that exist. So we've always looked at it as we sold sort of blocks of time, a 4-hour, 8-hour visit, and we're still doing that, and I think that's still most of our visits. But we wanted to also sort of get it aware to the superintendents and course officials that, hey, there's your general assessment where we can look at everything, or if you really want to get focused, we can really dive into certain topics. So any questions on that part of it, or should I move on to the restructuring aspect?
No, you can talk about restructuring, I think.
Okay, so essentially what we did was we kind of just combined some of the regions together. So we had a Northeast and a Mid-Atlantic region, and we merged those two together. We had a Florida region and the Southeast region. We merged those two together to create the Southeast. Then we had it was a North Central region that we actually combined with other parts of our Central region. So that one goes basically north-south all the way from Minnesota to Texas. And then we had a Northwest and a Southwest, and we combined those. And the idea is it gives us a little bit more flexibility for championships, for whether or not someone maybe gets sick, or something happens where one agronomist can't quite do everything, gets pulled in a different direction. It also helps us with specialized projects. Like the prime example right now is the drought conditions in the West. This will allow for some of those that larger group then of 4 agronomists to work together on special projects, special articles, things like that are focused more towards the drought. We could have the same thing happen in the Northeast, but maybe it's a different regulatory issue, some form like that. So that allows the directors of those regions to have a little bit more flexibility there. And for a lot of cases, the superintendents, there's been no real change other than some of the Mid-Atlantic, superintendents now they're under the Northeast name. Honestly, I think one of the hardest challenges that have faced superintendents is it's been pretty popular, our regional updates that we do every 2 weeks or so. And the idea is we'll just write an update as to what we're seeing in our travels over a 2-week period. Well, when you're located in Seattle and you're visiting courses and it's your turn to do an update, you've got to really work well with everyone in the region to find out how can we make this relevant for everyone in Seattle through California and into Arizona, and we've sort of faced that same challenge in the Northeast with, how do we understand how we can benefit the superintendent in Maine versus Virginia. And so a lot of times the issues can overlap, and what happens in Virginia will probably happen in the more northern portion of the Northeast in a couple weeks, but that's definitely a challenge that I think we're still working towards improving that. But that's probably the only effect that's really happened for the superintendents is some of these regional updates. It's hard to get them to be as specific because before, Elliot Dowling would write a regional update that was very specific to southern portion of Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and it wasn't as relevant to the folks in Boston. But now we have to work a little bit better together to try to get everything as consistent as possible. So that's been again something we continue to strive to get better at.
Yeah, and I think, there's no way around that anyway. If I was thinking about giving updates for, Pennsylvania, what's going on in Pittsburgh is probably going to be very different than State College and very different from Philly. So I think most people just have to take it all with a grain of salt in the sense that you're not going to be able to give everybody their course specific update. But I do understand the difference between friggin' Seattle and Los Angeles, California. There's a huge difference there. So, I don't know. Does anybody do anything, and maybe this is just add more work and nobody wants to do it, but would you have like a list of your courses that you visit where maybe you just do even more regionalized, like, hey guys, this is what I'm seeing? Do you ever send emails to your courses specifically, or do you rely on the regional updates?
We kind of still rely on the regional updates. At times we will do that where we've got something specific. I know a good example was 2010 where the weather was so bad and so hot and there was so much turf loss that we actually sent a letter out to all our clubs that we had visited over the past few years to try to say, look, this has been a banner year. Here's what's going on at a lot of courses that we're seeing. I probably do a fair amount of that, but through social media and through Twitter, where I try to sort of provide kind of an update as to what I've been seeing, and a lot of the superintendents sort of know them on Twitter and sort of follow it that way. But not a whole lot. So we try to keep it as consistent as possible, so we can track to see how impactful some of these updates are going to be.
Okay. So, what I would say on that note, I'll do a kind of final roundtable to say whatever you have, any last thoughts, and then also if you get anything coming up, Adam, I know you're probably doing some speaking this fall, and also definitely share your Twitter in case somebody is seeing this and wants to find you. I know it's pretty easy to find you, but let's do that. So you can start.
Sure. I guess final thoughts. First of all, thanks for having me on. If we just do a recap of kind of what we talked about, I think it's been, for the most part, a pretty successful season for a lot of folks, aside from the winter injury. So, from that standpoint, going forward, I think folks are looking forward to the fall. A lot of superintendents I'm talking to this time of year are definitely kind of have that worn down look. It's kind of like a running back at the 15th week of an NFL season. You get a little worn down. You're ready for rest time. So, but other than that, things have been pretty good, and hopefully they continue through that way through September and October, and then on to time when the snow flies, which I'm excited about for personal reasons. A lot of people know I would say I'm a snowboard addict, to be honest. So first step in addiction is admitting the problem, I think. So it's definitely one of my things. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I know you're always talking about going somewhere to snowboard. Hey, I see you have an Under Armour shirt on. Are you
I do, yeah.
Jordan Spieth fan? It seems like he is to Under Armour what Tiger Woods was to Nike back in the day, and I think some of these companies that grab onto these guys early on are pretty smart.
Yeah, I'm certainly a Spieth fan. I think he's a great player. He's good for golf. Actually, his family grew up in the same town that I live in Bethlehem, so it's pretty neat. He still has some family there too.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, well, thanks. I'm going to give it over to Tom. Tom, you have any last-minute things?
No, not really anything agronomic. I thank you for joining us today. I think we covered a lot of territory, and I hope it's helpful to those that are watching or will pick it up in a recorded form. A non-turf question I have for you, Adam, is how in the heck have you kept all the traffic noise away from you?
Well, I'm actually in a rest stop. I'm all the way in the back corner.
Aha.
I'm near the pet area, so there was a couple people walking their dogs near me, kind of looking. But yeah, not driving. So I've got a pretty solid self-imposed no texting driving. No texting while driving policy.
Yeah.
I definitely wouldn't do this while driving.
Yeah.
So,
well,
yeah.
I figured as much, but they, when they do interviews and so forth on campus, and so it's always an issue with traffic and noise. And I'm pretty impressed you're like in a soundproof backseat.
Good. It needs to be. This as a joke. This is my office. Really, it's my car. Sadly.
Yeah.
So.
That's great. Thanks again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'll wrap up by saying thanks, and you can be the guinea pig for the first live Periscope too. Everybody on here is quiet. I always yell at the Periscope people to touch the screen because they give you hearts. Like, give me some more hearts so I can build up my reputation on there. But we do have some people watching live on here, and that's good. And I think we'll do it in the future. I think the information that you gave is great. I think it's probably holds true year in and year out, aside from some key issues. I hope that if people missed it and they're watching now, the information you gave out about collar management is probably something that people could revisit every couple of years to try and improve that. That's always a challenge. The disease stuff comes and goes, and we kind of know how to manage it. I think that with the Rutgers work and the work from the Northeast group, the anthracnose is almost a non-issue anymore. Summer patch seems to be the same thing every year. It can be a little bit severe, but it cleans up pretty quickly going into the season. And I feel like we not reinvent the wheel, but we repeat ourselves a lot unless there's something that really comes in and slams us. And so I think that's pretty good information. And yeah, so good. I'm glad that you were able to do that. I would say personally, one thing I want to promote, because it's our show and I can do whatever the hell I want. One thing I want to promote is the Golf Turf Conference. The website's going to go live. That's the Penn State Golf Turf Conference, November 10th to the 12th this year. And Adam, I think we're going to have you come and speak, hopefully in the future, maybe next year. I know Dave Otis is going to give a talk this year, and Darren Bavard always does the year in review. So they'll be there, and then we have a lot of good speakers. Actually, Cale Bigelow is going to be coming this year and do our pre-conference seminar. So that's, again, another great conference in early November here on campus at Penn State, and so I wanted to maybe give a shout-out about that. And I'll put a link, Adam, to your Twitter account and to just the USGA Green Section website in the YouTube rebroadcast, and also information about the conference. So with that, I'm going to wrap up, and thank you, and Tom, thank you also for joining us today. I'll probably be asleep in about 3 or 4 hours because I'm still crazy jet lagged from yesterday and this past week.
I thought that was from working out this morning.
Yeah, no, that'll hit me tomorrow probably. When you work out for the first time in 19 years, my guess is the second or third day becomes a big problem for you.
Yeah.
I won't be able to walk upstairs, but starting the process of what I told those guys in South Africa, getting ripped, which is 0% chance of happening, but it always sounds funny when you say it. So. All right, with that, we're going to end the broadcast, and thank you again, and we'll see everybody next time. I think we have next week with Frank Wong is supposed to be on from Bayer, Environmental Science. So I don't know what we're going to be talking about. Probably his new role that has a lot to do with a broader vision within Bayer, and that's probably what we'll talk about. All right, so with that, I'll say bye, and thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.